Let me be direct with you from the outset, because the situation unfolding across the Middle East demands directness. What we are witnessing is not a ceasefire collapsing. It is not a diplomatic setback. What we are witnessing is the carefully orchestrated end of a strategic pause and the opening of a military escalation that has been planned for weeks while cameras were focused elsewhere. I am looking at intelligence assessments that have been circulating among European military analysts for the past 72 hours. What they show is not random violence. It is not spontaneous retaliation. What they show is a synchronized military preparation across 4 separate theaters involving at least 3 state actors and 2 non-state forces, all moving according to a timeline that suggests coordination at the highest levels. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this truce was never designed to last, why the escalation we are about to see has already been greenlit by decision-makers in Tehran, Washington, and Tel Aviv, and why what happens in the next 96 hours will determine whether we are looking at a regional conflict or something far more dangerous. This is Daily Brief. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively analyzed by Western intelligence agencies right now. This is not speculation. Let's start with the truce itself, because understanding why it ended requires understanding what it actually was. On April 11, 2026, a 10-day cessation of hostilities was announced following intense mediation by Qatar, Egypt, and surprisingly Pakistan. The agreement covered Gaza, southern Lebanon, and theoretically, operations in Syria and Iraq. Notice I said theoretically. The ceasefire was never comprehensive. It was geographically limited, temporally constrained, and critically, it contained no enforcement mechanism. The geographic scope is important. The truce applied to direct military exchanges between Israeli forces and Hamas in Gaza, between the IDF and Hezbollah along the Lebanese border, and between US installations and Iranian-backed militias in Syria and Iraq. What it did not cover was the Red Sea shipping corridor, where Houthi attacks continued unabated. It did not cover Iranian nuclear facilities, which remained under the threat of Israeli airstrikes, and it did not cover the ongoing intelligence war being conducted by both sides across the region, according to reporting by Reuters and confirmed by multiple regional diplomatic sources. The truce was never intended as a pathway to peace. It was a tactical pause. Both sides used it to resupply, reposition, and prepare for the next phase. Israel moved 3 additional Iron Dome batteries into northern positions. Hezbollah, according to Lebanese security officials cited by Al Jazeera, repositioned approximately 4,000 fighters from the Bekaa Valley toward the border zone. Iran, meanwhile, accelerated uranium enrichment at Fordo to 84% purity. That number matters. 90% is weapons grade. The gap between 84 and 90% is measured in weeks, not months. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now let's talk about what actually terminated this truce, because the official narrative and the operational reality are not aligned. Announcement number 1, the Rafah operation. And this one matters more than anything else, because it reveals the entire strategic calculation behind Israel's acceptance of the truce in the first place. On April 21, 2026, at approximately 3:47 a.m. local time, Israeli Defense Forces launched a ground incursion into Rafah, the southernmost city in Gaza, where an estimated 1.4 million displaced Palestinians had been sheltering. The operation involved the 162nd Armored Division, elements of the Givati Brigade, and extensive air support. Within 6 hours, IDF forces had seized control of the Philadelphia Corridor, the narrow strip of land separating Gaza from Egypt, and the Rafah border crossing itself. The Israeli government framed this as a counter-terrorism operation targeting Hamas leadership. Prime Minister Netanyahu stated publicly that intelligence indicated senior Hamas commanders, including Yahya Sinwar, were operating from tunnels beneath Rafah. But here is what the intelligence actually shows. According to reporting by the New York Times, citing US intelligence officials, American satellites detected the military buildup around Rafah beginning on April 14th, 3 days after the truce began. The positioning of armor, the forward deployment of engineering units equipped for urban warfare, the pre-positioning of medical evacuation helicopters, all of it occurred during the ceasefire. This was not a reactive operation. This was a planned offensive that the truce provided cover to prepare. Egypt's foreign ministry issued a statement within hours calling the operation a violation of the ceasefire and a betrayal of Egyptian mediation efforts. Jordan recalled its ambassador from Tel Aviv. Qatar suspended its mediation role entirely, but the damage was done, the truce was functionally over, received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the Hezbollah response. This is the part that Western media is underreporting, and it is the part that signals where this escalation is actually headed. On April 21st, approximately 9 hours after the Rafah operation began, Hezbollah launched what it described as a retaliation strike. But this was not the usual Katyusha rocket barrage. This was qualitatively different. According to Israeli Defense Forces statements confirmed by multiple Lebanese sources, Hezbollah fired between 220 and 250 precision-guided missiles into northern Israel over a 6-hour period. These were not unguided rockets. These were guided munitions targeting specific infrastructure. The targets included the Ramat David Air Base, the military logistics hub at Tiberias, and critically, 3 different natural gas pipeline junction points in the Galilee region. Israel's Iron Dome intercepted approximately 70% of the incoming fire, which sounds effective until you understand the math. 30% of 220 missiles is 66 successful impacts. The Israeli electric grid in the north experienced cascading failures. Ramat David Air Base was temporarily non-operational. And here is the detail that should concern everyone paying attention. Hezbollah demonstrated the ability to saturate Israeli air defenses. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the strategic implications become impossible to ignore. The precision-guided missiles Hezbollah used were not domestically produced. According to analysis by the Institute for National Security Studies in Tel Aviv, and confirmed by satellite imagery analysis from ImageSat International, the missiles were Iranian-made Fighter 110 variants, with a circular error probable of less than 10 meters. That level of accuracy requires guidance systems that Hezbollah does not manufacture. It requires Iranian technology, Iranian training, and very likely, Iranian targeting intelligence. What this reveals is not just Hezbollah capability, it reveals Iranian strategic patience. Iran did not order this strike during the height of the previous crisis, when emotions were high and Western attention was focused. Iran waited for the truce, waited for the international community to relax, and then greenlit a response that demonstrates capability while maintaining plausible deniability. Hassan Nasrallah did not appear on television. There was no dramatic speech. The strikes spoke for themselves. Received. That is announcement number 2. Announcement number 3. And this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The United States repositioned the USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike group from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Arabian Sea on April 20th, 1 day before the Rafah operation. That timing is not coincidental. The Ford is the most advanced carrier in the US fleet. It carries 75 aircraft, including F-35C stealth fighters and EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft. Its movement from the Mediterranean, where it had been providing deterrence against Hezbollah, to the Arabian Sea, where it is now positioned 200 nautical miles from the Iranian coast, signals a shift in operational focus. According to US Department of Defense briefings reported by Defense News, the stated purpose of the repositioning is to monitor Iranian nuclear facilities and provide strike capability if needed. But strategically, what it does is remove US military deterrence from the Lebanese theater at the exact moment Israel was preparing to violate the ceasefire. That is not an accident. That is coordination. The reason this matters is the same reason the entire regional balance is shifting. The United States is no longer willing or able to manage multiple simultaneous deterrence missions across the Middle East. Moving the Ford to deter Iran means accepting higher risk in Lebanon. Accepting higher risk in Lebanon means Israel operates with reduced US air cover. Reduced US air cover means Israel must either back down or escalate unilaterally. Israel chose escalation. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are 2 stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The surface story is that Israel violated a ceasefire to pursue Hamas, Hezbollah retaliated, and now we are back to the cycle of violence. That story is true but incomplete. The deeper story is about what happens when a 10-day pause allows all parties to reassess their strategic positions and realize that the status quo is untenable. Israel's calculation is straightforward. The government believes that Hamas in Gaza and Hezbollah in Lebanon represent existential threats that cannot be negotiated away. The intelligence assessment, according to reporting by Haaretz, citing senior IDF sources, is that every day Hamas and Hezbollah remain intact, they grow stronger. More tunnels are dug, more missiles are stockpiled, more operatives are trained. From this perspective, a truce is not a path to peace. It is a tactical disadvantage that allows adversaries to prepare for the next round. Iran's calculation is more complex but equally rational. Tehran understands that direct confrontation with Israel and the United States risks catastrophic military defeat. But Tehran also understands that its proxy network, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, Iraqi militias, provides strategic depth and plausible deniability. The 10-day truce allowed Iran to resupply these forces, coordinate their responses, and prepare for a multi-front strategy that forces Israel and the United States to fight on too many fronts simultaneously. Think carefully about what this represents. When the United States positions its most advanced carrier strike group to deter Iran, and Iran responds not with direct military action, but by enabling Hezbollah to launch 250 precision strikes into Israel, that is not weakness, that is asymmetric strategy. Iran trades its proxies' casualties for the preservation of its own conventional forces, while achieving the same strategic effect, making Israeli security untenable. The American position is perhaps the most contradictory. President Biden stated on April 18th that the United States supports Israel's right to self-defense, but opposes a ground invasion of Rafah. 3 days later, Israel invaded Rafah, and the United States moved its carrier group into position to deter not Israel, but Iran. Secretary of State Antony Blinken called the Rafah operation deeply concerning. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin authorized additional precision munitions transfers to Israel. Those two positions are not compatible. If you own a business that relies on Middle Eastern trade routes, what is happening in the Red Sea is not a foreign policy story, it is a logistics cost story. If you drive a vehicle in Europe or North America, the oil price volatility triggered by regional instability is not an abstraction, it is showing up at your gas pump. These effects are materializing right now, and they are going to intensify. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. Let me take you back to the Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BC. Athens and Sparta, the two dominant powers of the Greek world, went to war. The war lasted 27 years. Both sides were exhausted, their treasuries depleted, their populations decimated. And who won? Neither Athens nor Sparta. The true victor was Macedon, a peripheral power that had stayed out of the conflict, preserved its strength, and then swept down to dominate a weakened Greek world under Philip II and later Alexander the Great. The parallel is almost exact. Israel and Iran are Athens and Sparta. They are locked in a multi-decade confrontation that neither can definitively win, but neither can afford to lose. Every escalation depletes resources, hardens positions, and creates opportunities for third parties. And who is positioned as Macedon in this scenario? China. While Israel and Iran trade strikes, while American carrier groups patrol the Arabian Sea, China is signing energy deals with Iran, infrastructure agreements with Saudi Arabia, and port development contracts across the Middle East. China is not sending troops. China is not picking sides in sectarian conflicts. China is simply purchasing influence, while its competitors exhaust themselves. The Belt and Road Initiative is the modern equivalent of Philip's quiet expansion northward, while the Greek city-states bled each other dry. Beijing understands that regional instability is not a crisis to be solved, it is an opportunity to be exploited. Every day this conflict continues, Middle Eastern states become more skeptical of American security guarantees and more open to Chinese economic partnerships. The Chinese Foreign Ministry does not issue condemnations, it offers mediation, it does not deploy aircraft carriers, it builds ports. And in 20 years, when historians write about the decline of American influence in the Middle East, they will point to this moment when Washington was too focused on managing crises to notice Beijing was building the future. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths, because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1. Limited escalation with eventual de-escalation. In this scenario, Israel completes its Rafah operation within 2 to 3 weeks, declares Hamas leadership eliminated or significantly degraded, and accepts a new ceasefire mediated by Egypt and Qatar. Hezbollah conducts additional retaliatory strikes, but stops short of full-scale war. Iran continues nuclear enrichment, but does not cross the 90% threshold. The United States maintains carrier presence, but does not authorize strikes on Iranian facilities. Oil prices spike to $110 to $120 per barrel, but stabilize within 6 weeks. Civilian casualties in Gaza exceed 50,000, but the conflict does not spread beyond current boundaries. The probability of this path depends entirely on whether Israel achieves its objectives in Rafah quickly and whether Hezbollah's leadership calculates that full war would be suicidal. I assess this as a 40% probability. Path 2. Regional war with multi-front escalation. Israel's Rafah operation bogs down into urban warfare lasting months. Hezbollah interprets prolonged operations as an existential threat and launches a full missile barrage, 2,000 to 3,000 rockets per day, overwhelming Iron Dome. Israel retaliates with airstrikes deep into Lebanon, targeting Beirut infrastructure. Iran views this as crossing a red line and activates Iraqi militias to attack US bases in Iraq and Syria. The United States conducts airstrikes on Iranian proxy forces. Iran threatens to close the Strait of Hormuz. Oil prices exceed $150 per barrel. Regional economies collapse. Civilian casualties exceed 200,000 across multiple countries. The probability of this path increases every day the current escalation continues without diplomatic intervention. I assess this as a 35% probability. Path 3. Frozen conflict with permanent instability. Neither side achieves decisive victory. Israel occupies parts of Rafah indefinitely, but cannot eliminate Hamas. Hezbollah conducts sporadic strikes but avoids full war. Iran enriches uranium to weapons-grade levels, but does not build a deployable weapon. The United States maintains military presence but refuses direct engagement. The region enters a state of permanent low-intensity conflict with periodic flare-ups, economic stagnation, and massive refugee flows into Europe and neighboring countries. This becomes the new normal for a generation. I assess this as a 25% probability, but it is the scenario that could persist longest if it occurs. I think we are closer to Path 2 than the headlines suggest. The Rafah operation is already encountering stiffer resistance than Israeli planners anticipated. Hezbollah's missile strike demonstrated both capability and willingness to escalate, and critically, the diplomatic mechanisms that might have prevented escalation, Qatari mediation, Egyptian shuttle diplomacy, UN Security Council resolutions, have all been discredited or abandoned. When diplomacy fails, military logic takes over, and military logic in a multi-front environment with no clear exit strategy tends toward escalation. But here is the caveat: wars are not deterministic. They are shaped by decisions made by individuals under immense pressure with incomplete information. A single miscalculation can turn Path 1 into Path 2. A single act of restraint can prevent catastrophe. The question is whether the decision makers in Tehran, Tel Aviv, and Washington have the strategic patience to choose de-escalation when their domestic political incentives reward escalation. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, if Israel cannot achieve its objectives in Rafah within 2 weeks, does it accept a stalemate or expand operations into central Gaza? Second, if Hezbollah launches another major strike, does Israel retaliate against Lebanese infrastructure or does it show restraint? Third, if Iran enriches uranium to 90%, does the United States conduct airstrikes or does it accept a nuclear threshold Iran? Those 3 questions will determine which path we are on. Tell me in the comments what you think happens next. Tell me if you think Israel backs down or doubles down. Tell me if you think Hezbollah has already crossed the point of no return. We will keep tracking every development in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and the Strait of Hormuz. That is what Daily Brief does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand where this conflict is actually headed. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, because what happens in the next 96 hours will tell us more than the last 10 days did. Save this video, come back in a week and check these predictions. We will see you in the next analysis.